So Sri Lanka is on the verge of collapse. They're about to default on a $52 billion loan there. This naturally, the COVID, the pandemic had a lot to do with starting these troubles for them. But even prior to the pandemic, they have a history, Sri Lankans have a history of mismanagement, of course. And when you look at their nation and how basically the Kleptocrats there control, it's one big family, by the way. It's just for the last 80 years, ever since 1948, since before their independence from the British, they have been controlled by one single family, and that's and I'll get back to that. But initially, when you look at the mismanagement and the policy blunders, and yes, some bad luck there as far as the pandemic goes, it's pretty evident that there's many contributing factors to what where they're at right now. So they're on the verge of collapsing. They're in debt about $52 billion. They're in current negotiation with IMF and the World Bank, trying to see if they can negotiate with the foreign agencies that have been loaning them money for the last many years, which basically are refusing to loan them money anymore. And they understood that the Lankans are gonna basically default on their loans because they have way too many imports, very little exports. They import a lot more than they export. They spend a lot more than they earn. So the clear mismanagement there. It doesn't take a rocket science when you start looking into their policy positions, their understanding of foreign relations, their understanding of the region itself. And it's not at all surprising that the youth, the younger generation now, is starting to rebel and starting to say the Rajapaksas, the ruling class there, it's one single family. They have to go, and no one can blame these the younger generations because they have been watching their families and their parents get robbed for many years. They grew up in this kind of an environment. So it's simple. It comes down to policy. It comes down to years of mismanagement, and then it comes down to some fate there. Naturally, that during the pandemic, their tourism completely died, and it came down to virtually nothing because no one was traveling, and the tourism, the foreign currency, is approximately 13% of Sri Lanka's GDP. So it's not at all surprising that they're looking to default on their loans. And they are in current negotiation with IMF to see if they can have their, the foreign agencies basically take a haircut in the loans that they provided them with, and possibly take a lot less than they actually owe them. So, so this is where they are right now, and that's why they're even in the news, because there's a lot of protest in Colombo and some of the other cities there, Colombo being one of their largest and main cities. And they're out protesting, and they're sending a message to this ruling class that you must go. So now the dilemma that the Lankans are in is who do you replace them with? And this is something that had caused a basic civil war in the past. It was a 20-year civil war that the Lankans fought with the Tamils Tamils are basically the Indian descent that lived there. And so there was a civil war there for many years. And it kind of ended um, after 20 years back in the early 2000s. So it's currently in a very, very bad situation, and the leaders there have no clue where to take the nation, which direction to take the nation in, because basically they're kleptocrats. They have been robbing the country for the last 80 years, and if you can imagine, the president and prime minister are both brothers, and then the one that was recently elected, the finance minister, is also one of the younger brothers, and supposedly Basil Rajapaksa is one of their masterminds there that had planned, a lot of these ways of taking over the government and trying to bring one of their older brothers back in power. So here's what I go into this other philosophical aspects of this, of why nations like this that have a tremendous amount of potential go on the verge of collapse, if not completely collapsing, and now they're looking at a complete revolution there. In a matter of fact, a few years ago, I was reporting on this and saying that there might be a revolution in Sri Lanka because of these kleptocrats that have been ruling them for the last 80 years, starting with DM Rajapaksa, who was in the state council of Ceylon, which was the former name of Sri Lanka. And they received their independence from the British, 1948, and ever since then they have been ruled by the same family. And that's where the problem is. This family basically, is very good at manipulating their public and the Lankans, and they know exactly what to tell them. The last one that got elected president, he simply came and campaigned on a lower taxes campaign that, if you vote for me, I'll lower your taxes. That's great and all, but then how do you raise income? So obviously there's a tremendous amount of corruption there. And this island has a lot of potential. It's a beautiful island nation. Tons of tourists for many, many years, even till as recent as 2019. There were approximately 2.3 million people going through that island. Now they have dwindled down to about 173,000. So there's a huge gap there. And to further complicate things, their remittance went down from the Lankans living abroad, basically stopped sending them money. And so their foreign reserves had dwindled down to nothing. And right now they are about to default on all their loans, not just due to that, but naturally there's other components to their problems there. So that said, it's really up to the public of Sri Lanka to take that nation back from these ruling class that's there. And this is a problem that we see across the subcontinent. When you look at India, where the Gandhis were ruling, and then you have the Bhuttos in Pakistan. So these dynasties that rule can be either good for the nation or extremely bad for the nation. But it's always, the gains are always short term because they need to prove that, look, keep electing our family and we'll keep taking care of you. But in the long term, when these dynasties remain in power for, say, 80, 100 years, they basically start to fall apart because of their mismanagement and their complacency. So now, when you look at their policy blunders are due to mismanagement. They have no idea how to communicate with the rest of the world. They're basically telling their debtors to take a haircut. We can't pay you. Now, what do? So at this point, they're turning to India for $500 billion loan, which India already provided. Bangladesh provided them another few hundred million, 2 to 300 million. They have been more inclined towards China than any other nation. So aligning themselves with China also has given them a lot of problems. Their current problems are all because they have tried to align themselves with China. During this invasion of Ukraine, there was the Sri Lankans were one of the nations that abstained for a vote against Russia. So you see, there are these series of blunders that these kleptocrats make in Sri Lanka that causes not just grief to the nation, but is about to put a nail in their coffin, and it's becoming more and more difficult. So the only way out for the Lankans is to overthrow this entire family. That's the Rajapaksas that are running their nation like a business. It's an enterprise to them. They could care less. They rob this nation for everything they can, and if it completely collapsed, they would probably be the first ones to flee out of there, along with the millions of hundreds of refugees, hundreds and thousands of refugees that are going into India now, trying to basically find food. So the foreign reserves down to nothing. They're about to, and they need foreign reserves in order to buy medicine, fuel, and some other necessities. One could live without fuel, but you cannot live without medicine. So the foreign reserves give them the ability to buy the necessities which have to be paid in cash. So these are the issues that the Lankans are facing right now, and I would, I personally is keeping an eye on them, but it's very difficult for them at this point because roughly around 500,000 people have gone into poverty due to this last crisis that they're facing, the post-pandemic, and the pandemic is not even completely done yet. So moving into the future, this nation would have to get rid of the kleptocrats that are robbing this nation for the last 80 years, and that's strictly my opinion, but that's where their problem is at. And they have not learned a lesson. But that said, the younger generation that's coming in, the millennials and the other Generation Z that's coming in, basically looking to overthrow this family. And they're realizing that these are the people that are causing all their problems there. And it's impossible to continue their reign of power on the Lankans if the younger generation, which is their entire labor force, is not going to cooperate with them. And that's exactly what's happening post-pandemic. They're simply telling the ruling class there, you must go. And they realize that they're being robbed because they can see themselves in comparison to the other nations, not just the surrounding nations, but in comparison to other nations that are similar size and portion to their own, that something is wrong, that they have a tremendous amount of potential there, but then you have one family that's just robbing them in every possible direction. So the policy mismanagement and fate, if you can use that word, because the pandemic was really not something that they brought on themselves. It just happened to the world, and they're one of the nations that are suffering tremendously because they're looking at ways to get out of it, and it's been very difficult for them. It's been very tough. Fuel shortages, food shortages, they just basically are looking to collapse in the next few months if they don't pay their debt or something is provided to them as far as some monetary or financial help. So um, this is a nation, in my opinion, if it were to get rid of their ruling class there, could move in a completely right direction. And they have quite a bit of potential as far as growth. GDP, they could improve their security, which is necessary for foreign investment, and which is what a lot of these kleptocrats kind of fail to provide, is the security for. So if any corporation is going to invest in Sri Lanka, they're going to look for security. So if there is no security and you have bombs going off like in a few years back when there was bombing in 2019, it scared the hell out of a lot of the foreigners they would visit and foreign investment. So foreign investment always looks for security for its not just for its business, for its people that it has to employ in order to bring investment there. So if the younger generation understands this and overthrows their somehow overthrows the Rajapaksas, they are basically at that point looking at a possible future, a prosperous future for themselves in the next out years. But the way it stands right now, if the status quo is not going to help them for very long, and it would take a lot for them to get out. The world would have to jump in. IMF, World Bank, other foreign agencies that have refused to give them any loans, but possibly restart their lending again to the Lankans. So we have yet to see exactly how this progresses, but their situation is extremely dire, and they are no doubt on a verge of complete collapse if the help is not provided to the Lankans.